And hello, Jets fans, and welcome to another episode of Rich Sports Talk. Thanks so much for joining us here today. So much to talk about. The big quarterback domino still waiting to fall, but Joe Douglas with a pretty powerful press conference today in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. A lot to dissect and a lot to talk about. And of course, we will get to all of your comments about the Joe Douglas press conference and your thoughts on the quarterback carousel. But the biggest thing was safeties, of course. I mean, Joe Douglas made that joke when he started the press conference. Of course, you guys want to talk about our safeties, which is still a position the Jets will need to look at. But let's get to the big picture here. Aaron Rodgers is out of the darkness, but we still do not have a decision on it. But a bit of very interesting news did happen from this press conference. We learned that the Jets are meeting Derek Carr for a second time. And according to Joe Douglas, they really like Derek Carr. And they said that the meeting the first time went incredibly well. So let's be honest, it's going to come down to two quarterbacks for the Jets. And the way the Jets are presenting themselves, and Joe Douglas is talking, is that they are pretty confident they're going to get one of the two. And the Jets need to get either Derek Carr or they need to get Aaron Rodgers. Now, the obvious is Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback, but are the Jets better off with Derek Carr with less money and having the ability to keep their draft picks? There is a lot at stake here for the New York Jets and a lot of interesting things to talk about. But it wasn't just the quarterbacks. They also talked about Zach Wilson, which we'll get into a little bit. They talked about Mekhi Becton in the state of the offensive line. But Joe Douglas had this quote that I thought was very interesting. He says, "We'll be ready to pull the trigger when we have to." Now, reading into that a little bit, seeing that Derek Carr is having a second interview, I think the Jets have a good idea of what's happening in Green Bay, and they are just waiting for basically the chips to fall where they may, or waiting for Aaron Rodgers to basically give a final okay to the Green Bay Packers. I am really fascinated to see how the Jets handle this whole situation. I think that they've handled the trade market incredibly well. I feel like if they do eventually make a trade with the Packers, it will be not for a first-round pick this year. Probably will be one of those of the, like, a lot of parameters on the trades as well. But with Carr, I did an episode a couple weeks ago saying that I would rather have Carr now than wait on Rodgers, and just to make sure that you have Rodgers, like, because again, we don't know what's going on with Aaron Rodgers. We hear that it seemingly, according to Gutekunst, is over in Green Bay. I think that the Packers are ready to move on. I think the Packers are ready to start a new chapter, but we still have to wait and see. And the weird thing for Aaron Rodgers is, while I would love to see Aaron on the Jets, a weird thing is with Rodgers, if he really wants to win another Super Bowl, the pathway is a lot easier in the NFC with the Packers than it is with the Jets. Now, I think if you put Rodgers on the Jets, they are a Super Bowl contender. But you still got to go through Cincinnati. You still got to go through Kansas City. I think the Jets with Rodgers would be better than Buffalo. I think the Jets, if Mike White doesn't crack 5 ribs in a game on the road, could have won 2 games against Buffalo this season. But if I'm Aaron Rodgers, I'm kind of curious to see if he's looking at the state of the NFC where Tom Brady has retired. The Eagles are still a great team, but who's the other really great quarterback in the NFC? And even teams that have, you would think, quarterbacks are seemingly looking. One interesting tidbit from today with all the coaches was they asked Pete Carroll about the draft. Because don't forget, Seattle's got all those picks from the Russell Wilson trade. And he said that they're keeping an eye on all the quarterbacks. Now, this could be a stunt to try to get more value for those picks. But it is kind of telling that Geno Smith had a great season for them last year. And they're already looking at the draft. Like, let me be honest, I would not be shocked if, let's say, Seattle takes a kid like, let's say, Anthony Richardson, where he's someone that really needs to develop, but you see the high-end ceiling with him. And with Geno, maybe you can get another year or two out of him while Richardson sits. Because don't forget, the Seahawks had the 5th pick in the draft. They will likely have a chance to draft a quarterback. I don't think they're going to trade up to go and get a quarterback, but with all the draft capital that Seattle has accumulated, and don't forget, too, they have the 20th pick in the draft. If they really wanted to, they can move up. They can go and get another player from 20 because they have all those additional second-round picks from the Russell Wilson trade. I mean, there is a lot of flexibility there for the quarterback position. And again, guys, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. We will get to them as soon as we can. One interesting thing also said today by Joe Douglas was he addressed Zach Wilson. And he said the following: our stance on Zach hasn't changed. There's a very high ceiling. I still feel strongly that Zach is going to be able to hit his ceiling. I almost feel like whoever the Jets get will be telling how they feel about Zach Wilson. Because part of the reason I think that the Jets are so enamored with Aaron Rodgers is they know it's going to be, basically, they're going to date Rodgers. They know it's going to be a 1 or 2 year thing. He's going to make them really good for a short period of time. But in the Jets' head, they are kind of hoping to somehow salvage Zach Wilson. And look, I know that there is a lot of Jet fans that have moved on. I don't think you can rely on Zach Wilson being great, but the Jets also invested the number 2 overall pick in the kid. And for everyone that's saying, oh, the Jets were idiots, the Jets shouldn't have drafted him, the Jets made a mistake. Well, we also have to remember San Francisco traded up to 3 because they thought they could get Zach Wilson. The Eagles were trying to get up to get Zach Wilson. There's a lot of teams and a lot of smart people in the NFL that were trying to get up to get Zach Wilson. And right now, I kind of feel like the Jets, that their hope is somehow they can continue to develop Zach, and maybe not even to be their starter, but at least salvage some trade value, because there's no trade value for Zach Wilson right now. And if you're the Jets, Rodgers in some ways helps you with that, because is there a chance like Rodgers retires after 1 season, but it gives Zach a chance to learn? Sure. But at the same time, if you go out there and get Derek Carr, which is likely going to be a 4-year contract, you're kind of telling everyone, like, we love Zach. We think Zach's a talented player, but it's not going to work here. Like, he's going to have to go somewhere else. And look, Zach Wilson's going to be on this roster next year because of his cap hit. Like, he is going to be a member of the New York Jets. The only way he's not going to be a member of this Jet team is if someone trades for him. Now, we've seen crazier things happen. I mean, Rick Meyer was traded for a first-round pick after being an absolute disaster in Seattle, but I don't foresee that happening with the Jets. Now, there's a lot of other interesting roster moves, too, that were outside the combine. They asked Joe Douglas about the cap situation. He feels that they're in a healthy cap situation because they don't have a lot of dead money tied up long-term. And he didn't discuss the cuts, but I do think it's clear that the Jets are going to make a couple cuts. I think Corey Davis is going to be one of those likely candidates. Carl Lawson's a funny one. I think the Jets would love to bring him back in some capacity. But it is kind of funny with Corey Davis, because it's funny to me because the Jets are seemingly recruiting another wide receiver, and that's Robert Woods, as we're seeing the Titans are completely stripping it down and going complete fire sale. Now, everyone's going to talk about Jack Conklin to the Jets. Personally, I don't love Conklin. I think he's been getting injured a lot the last too many years. I think he's going to want a big cap hit. I don't think he'd be a good fit. And I'll get to the tackles in a little bit. But John Franken-Myers was openly recruiting Robert Woods to come to the Jets next year. And I think Woods would be a nice complementary fit for this team, because Woods isn't a number 1 receiver. We know this. But Woods is a really good, reliable number 2 receiver, number 3 receiver. And this is someone that still last year, with all the struggles there, still had 53 catches and 527 yards. I think he'd be a nice depth piece. I don't think he would cost too much. And look, for the Jets wide receiving core, one of the biggest things for this team is you just want some stability in production. I mean, Woods has been able to stay pretty healthy throughout his career. Corey Davis has always had the injury bug. And with the Jets, I think Woods would be a nice compliment because outside of Garrett Wilson, the Jets have basically the P word, which is potential. I love Elijah Moore. I think Elijah Moore has the talent to be an incredible receiver for this team. But at the same time, you look last year wanting the trade demand, and again, looking like he was in the right to demand that trade, but still like you see how talented he is and you don't see the production match that. So I love Elijah Moore, but I think you need to bring in a veteran receiver to help with this group. And I think Woods could be a very nice complement to a Garrett Wilson and to Elijah Moore, because I don't think the Jets are going to go out and make a big splash in free agency in terms of wide receiver. If there's anything, it'd be the draft. I think there is a scenario where the Jets could potentially get a receiver at 13, because I do think the best receiver in the draft is likely going to be there at 13. It depends on the whole tackle situation. But it is very telling how the Jets have approached this offseason, and it's good to see the Jets actively recruiting and members of the Jets actively recruiting. I think Woods could be a nice complementary piece, and a lot of cuts throughout the NFL today. We've seen Galladay cutting it. Stay away from Galladay. Just stay away from Galladay. The other two big important pieces about this press conference involve the trenches. Joe Douglas on the Quinnen Williams extensions. We've had several good discussions with his agent, and we feel really good about where we're at. I think the Jets get this extension done. I think that for the Jets, and especially Joe Douglas, there's this perception around the Jets for two things. Number one is that they haven't been able to get their first-round picks to second contracts. A lot of that's because a lot of the first-round picks haven't really worked out. But the second thing, too, is that they don't pay for their guys. I mean, we saw it with Jamal Adams. We saw it with Marcus May. I think if you want to set a precedent, especially for this great rookie class the Jets have had, which, of course, was ranked the number one rookie class on NFL.com, you have to set a precedent for guys like Sauce Gardner, for guys like Garrett Wilson, for guys like Breece Hall, for guys like Jermaine Johnson. If you show up and you perform, you will get rewarded. Because Quinnen Williams was the best interior defensive lineman in football this year. He changed the way this defense operates. And you can tell that this is someone that's also coming into his prime. He's still young. He still has a lot of great years ahead of him. And the Jets, don't make this get ugly. Don't let this waffle. Don't let this take forever. Get this done. Show to this team and this fan base that you are committed to winning, but more importantly, that you are committed to keeping good young players. And look, I get it. Joe Douglas has a number in mind. Joe Douglas never wants to overpay. I get that. And to his credit, it has worked out pretty well. Now, I wouldn't be paying Jamal Adams $17 million a year. That contract seemed to be a smart move by the Jets to not do that. But if I have to make Quinnen Williams the highest paid defensive player in football, which you could make an argument that we could be heading toward that direction, I think that it's more important to show to especially this young draft class and the young players on this team and to this league, like if you perform with the Jets, you're going to get paid. You're going to get rewarded. I do think that does speak highly in the locker room and is very important message. And before we get to your comments, one other thing that was mentioned was the offensive line. So let's get to Mekhi Becton. Becton looks in unbelievable shape. Actually posted on Twitter today of him working out. I give him a lot of credit. He's been putting in a lot of work this year. But Douglas was a little bit more on him. He says Becton's in good health, however, would not commit to him being a starter, and that the team hasn't made a decision on his fifth-year option, but did add that they were really impressed with how his rehab's going, and that when he is healthy, how dominant of a player he could be. And one of the intriguing factors about that was they also brought up Dwayne Brown. And for the Jets, They sounded very interested in keeping Brown back if he wants to keep playing. He's had his surgery. He's on the road to recovery. And I do believe the Jets would love Dwayne Brown back for a lot of different reasons. I think the first thing is the leadership and the experience that they have. Now, the other big thing with him is it gives you a solid back option. I don't think that the Jets want to go into next season with Dwayne Brown penciled in as the left tackle. My belief is they want to go in with 4 tackles. They really like Max Mitchell, and I think Max Mitchell proved that he can be a starter in this league. And I think that their goal is he is the backup at the right tackle position. There have been talks that Becton could go back to the left side. If I'm the Jets, I would keep him at right tackle. I believe also the wear and tear at right tackle could be a little bit less than the left tackle position. And it gives you Max Mitchell in case Becton gets hurt. So what does that leave the left tackle? It leaves Dwayne Brown there. And what I believe the Jets are going to do is draft an offensive lineman with the 13th pick. I don't believe the Jets are going to give up the 13th pick for Rodgers. And if I'm the Jets, I also will be doing a full disclosure, guys. I'm going to be doing my first mock draft. Look, I know I've gotten a lot of work the last couple of weeks, but I'm going to do a full mock draft. I'm going to do mock draft Mondays from now on. We're going to have that on the channel. I'm going to do my full first rounder, but I want to wait because I don't love doing the mock drafts this early. I prefer to do, especially the detailed ones, after free agency because you pencil in someone in a mock draft and then 2 days later, team signs a high-end corner and it's like, okay, well, they're not picking a corner now in the first round. But I will be doing that. I have my first one, and I also want to wait till after the combine because I think the combine is a good mark of where we are in the offseason, especially with the mock draft and the draft process. So we will get to that. But let's get to some of your questions and comments, guys. Again, the chat is always open. Justin Jets, I know it's not a popular opinion, but if I was in charge of the Jets, unless I got Carr or Rodgers, sorry, I reversed it too, I draft another QB. So you false you if no one good take a shot on a second-round guy. Here's my thought, Justin Jets. One player I like long-term in this draft is Hendon Hooker. The problem is he's not going to be able to make an impact next year, and he's older. The problem I also see is you'll see this in my mock draft. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I believe that this is kind of going to be like basically the last 2 Jets quarterback drafts with Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson. I think there's going to be a run on quarterbacks in the top of this first round because we're seeing the interest in Carr and why so many teams are interested because there's a lack of quarterbacks. We even saw today Mariota got released by the Falcons. So I believe that the Bears, and you've heard from Adam Schefter yesterday, that the Bears are open to trading the first pick. I think the Texans are going to select a quarterback in the top 10. I believe that Carolina is going to select a quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked if Atlanta. So that's 3 teams right there. In Indianapolis, that's 4 potential teams. And I'm not even including some options like Seattle at 5. They hinted that they are looking at the quarterbacks in this draft. Now, I think that might be a little bit more smoke to get more compensation. But don't forget, Seattle made the playoffs last year. They had probably the best draft after the Jets last year. They're in a position, too, where they also have the 20th pick. Like, if they're looking at it and saying, we can get Geno for a 2 or 3 year deal, maybe then we can get a guy like Anthony Richardson who, because we have a set quarterback, we can develop. I mean, there's other teams I don't think you can rule out. Detroit's an interesting one. I don't think they're ready to move off of Goff, but could they like Anthony Richardson? Is there a guy that they fall in love with in this process? I mean, the Raiders at 7. I really believe that there is going to be a run on quarterbacks. Like, I am going to say this. I feel at least 4 quarterbacks are going in the top 10. I really believe that. And I think that there's going to be a mad scramble to the first round pick. And I believe the team that's going to get the first pick is actually Carolina. Because Carolina added all those second and third round picks. I think that they have some good, interesting young defensive players. Like, that's the thing with the Bears, which is going to be interesting, is do they just want picks or could they want some players back? Because if you are the Bears, I think you also want to get some players back. So we know Carolina's aggressive. We know Carolina wants to make a statement. I would not be shocked if they get all the way up to one. And I said this too, like when they made the hiring of Frank Reich could have taken the year off and picked the best option next year. I'm pretty confident that he was told who they're getting at quarterback, or they basically said, we don't tell us who you like the best in this draft class, and we will go get him. We will make sure that we go and get him with the first pick. Like, I can really see that being part of the pitch. So unfortunately, Justin, I get where you're coming from. I get what you're saying. The problem is I just don't think the Jets, because the Jets are not going to trade up that far. I think the furthest you'll see them trade up is 10. I'll get into that in my mock draft, but I don't think that they're going to be able to get realistically within the top 7 to get a great quarterback. And like they said, they like Zach Wilson. They've already invested a high draft pick in a quarterback. And I know it's a quarterback that no one likes, but they have invested it and they want to make sure that and I'm seeing the rest of it, like the stopgap with Baker and Jacoby Brissett. See, Jimmy G, I don't think is going to the Jets. I really believe he's either going to the Raiders, and a part of me thinks the Patriots. Like, it's weird because you had the Mac Jones story came out today that they couldn't yell at him, which again, Belichick, it doesn't seem like maybe he's the best fit for Belichick then. I would not be shocked if they're in the market for Jimmy G. I really wouldn't. I'm going back to guard Kareem. I think that's a very good question. Personally, I like him at the tackle position. I think the biggest problem, and I've talked to LeJay Douzable about this ad nauseum, which is it's hard to change positions. And LeJay thinks he can be a really good tackle, but he can be an all-pro guard. So I think AVT does give you versatility. But the Jets, if they were going to make this move, would have had to probably announced it already or basically said, look, AVT is going to be the left tackle next year. Personally, I wouldn't hate AVT being the left tackle. I think he did an admirable job. But I think the Jets realistically want to keep the interior intact. I think they're going to try to bring back Connor McGovern just to keep it so they have those 3 in the middle. Because don't forget, continuity is a big thing too. And the Jets didn't have continuity last year. So I think that the Jets are going to look to get a tackle. I also think they're going to really target a center in round 2, round 3. I like John Michael Schmitz a lot. The problem is I think he's going to go in the first round. I like the kid from North Dakota. The name's escaping me at the top of my head right now. I think he's a really good player. He could be an intriguing player in there as well. So I do think that the Jets are going to really heavily hit the offensive line. And look, there are some players in this draft too that I think the Jets could be a dark horse to get. Now, if let's say they love one of these wide receivers, I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets maybe invested in another wide receiver. I know that the Jets, like someone was mentioning, I'm not sure who was mentioning it the other day, one of the analysts, maybe drafting a tight end or upgrading the tight end. I don't think that there's a rookie that the Jets are going to see that they're going to be like, okay, he's head and shoulders above everyone else. We have to draft him at 13. Another interesting play. I don't think this is going to happen. Whose mock was it? I think it might have been Dane Brugler. And I really love Dane Brugler. But one pick I do not agree with was he had the Jets drafting Brian Branch. And look, Brian Branch to me is kind of like what Kyle Hamilton was last year. Actually, I think Kyle Hamilton's a little bit better because he's a bigger prospect. But Branch to me is that prospect where talent-wise, he's probably one of the top 5 players easily in this draft. You can maybe even make an argument that he's one of the top 3 players in the entire draft. But you look at where you can get value at that position. I just don't see the Jets, who need offensive line help, who have some bigger needs in other areas, basically drafting a safety. The one thing I could see them doing is if there's like a defensive tackle or pass rusher that falls to 13. Like if they have like a top 5 player grade on a player at 13, even if it's a defensive player, whether it's a pass rusher, I could see maybe the Jets doing that, because don't forget the quarterback market in the draft impacts the valuation, because one of the best examples of how this works is if a lot of quarterbacks go early, that helps the Jets because it pushes good prospects down the board. I think the best example I can use is Micah Parsons. You look at Micah Parsons, he was a top 5 player in that draft, but he fell all the way to the Cowboys at, I believe it was 11 or 12. But that was in the Sam Darnold, Josh Allen draft where you had multiple quarterbacks go early, and that pushes them down the board, basically. So, look, I don't think you're going to get like a Jalen Carter or one of those players. I think the tackles will go early, but like, could Tyree Wilson or Miles Murphy, the great edges from Texas Tech and Clemson, be there? We know the Jets love pass rushers, and if they could get one of the top 2 or 3 edge rushers in the entire draft, they might go, we can find an offensive lineman later, or maybe they love a certain receiver in this draft, like Jackson Smith-Njigba. We've seen how good he was. Jordan Addison, I'm really high on the kid from TCU. God, why is his name escaping me right now? I think Jefferson. I really like what he brings to the table, especially, Quentin Johnson. Sorry. Why did I think? Sorry about that. Quentin Johnson. He's the number 1 receiver on my board. And he brings something the Jets don't really have. Because you look at a lot of receivers in this draft, Quentin Johnson, 6'4", 215. So he brings size and physicality to the outside, and that's something that the Jets don't really have at wide receiver. So I could see the Jets going there as well. Let's see. It could be interesting. So, like, for example, Kareem, I don't think that's a bad point. So, for example, let's throw a hypothetical out there. If let's say the 2 top tackles go on, but Peter Skoronski's there, I think Skoronski could play tackle, but he looks like a really great guard. If he's there at, like, let's say 13, and the Jets decide like the best combination is putting him at right guard and putting Elijah Vera-Tucker at left tackle, right tackle, I wouldn't hate it. But I also think that if the Jets were going to move AVT out the tackle, they would have told him by now. I would not draft Stetson Bennett. Also, Stetson Bennett had that off the field issue. I would not touch Stetson Bennett. I wouldn't touch him. To me, Brian Branch early isn't worth it. No, I completely agree. I don't think Branch is worth it. And this is a decent, and you're right, this is a pretty decent safety class. This is a class where I think you can get someone, and don't forget, a lot of teams are going to be looking for offensive linemen, wide receivers, tight ends, like offensive playmakers on round 1 and 2. So you always see it every year, a defensive player fall, like that's probably got like a first round grade that falls out. And I think safety is one of those good ones. Like, I really like Antonio Johnson from Texas A&M. I doubt he gets to the second round, but he's someone that's there. One player I really like, and I talked about him in one of my mock drafts, I believe, for the Jets or prospects they should target. Actually, no, it was the senior day video. Is JL Skinner, the safety from Boise State, because he's got really good cover skills. 6'2", 220. I think you potentially even on day 3 of the draft. Like, there's a lot of safeties that could plug and play. And look, I know guys don't want to hear this, but I think Jordan Whitehead's going to be back for this Jet team, because the Jets, I don't think, are going to, and I know Douglas joked about the safety position today. I just don't see the Jets really going out. Like, if Bates is on the market, maybe they'll test it, but I could see the Jets either getting a low cap hit veteran to try to come in and play safety. A lot depends too, like how they feel about the safeties they have. They seem to really like Tony Adams last year. I think they're done with Ashton Davis. And it got a little annoying last year, too, because I felt like Ashton Davis should have gotten some more reps, especially down the end of the season when Joyner wasn't playing well and was getting hurt. But I think the Jets have made it pretty clear their thoughts and this new regime's thoughts on Ashton Davis, because basically I think they like him, but this was someone in the third round that the Jets thought was going to be a starter, and this was really going to be the breakout year for him. And unfortunately, it just hasn't worked. And I mean, a lot comes down to Tony Adams. I think they still have Will Parks. I still don't get the Jason Pinnock release. I still won't get why they did that, but I think it came down to that they had a bigger contract and more commitment to in terms of the contract, in terms of Ashton Davis. I hope that's not the case, but it does appear to be like a miscommunication. But again, guys, chat's open. Do you guys have any questions, any draft talk that you want to talk about, anything about Joe Douglas's comments from earlier today? And look, Douglas did say in terms of the money moves, the cuts, and the extensions, they won't happen until after the combine, which I think is pretty smart. He did also comment on Mekhi. Mekhi's in a good place right now. He's in as good of a place right now as I've seen him in a long time. And look, I think that's one of the reasons they want Dwayne Brown back desperately. And look, Dwayne Brown gets a pretty hefty chunk of change to be a backup, but you saw last year the value that he brought to the Jets. And look, I get some people who criticize the way he played down the stretch, but we have to remember, like, he was playing with an injury that most people thought was going to cost him the entire season. So I have to give him that credit that he was able to gut it out basically until the last week of the season, where the Jets like, okay, we're not in this, so we're going to sit you so your shoulder doesn't fall off. But I do think that if you're the Jets, Brown also is a nice piece where, like, let's say you drafted like a Paris Johnson and maybe they're not ready to go week one. You have someone that can maybe hold down the fort, or if they struggle at the left tackle position. Because look, Andrew Thomas is great for the Giants, but we saw that rookie year, it was up and down. And a lot of Giant fans thought that they had blown a pick. And it's kind of funny that you look back and now all of a sudden Andrew Thomas is one of the best left tackles in football. And, it was a rough start. And having someone like Dwayne Brown could maybe even be a good mentor to a young left tackle. How to study film, how to study technique, how to, read film in the NFL. Like, maybe there's little nuances of the game that he can show them that helps them get up to speed faster. I think Dwayne Brown could be a nice mentor on this team, and it gives the Jets a good depth piece. Because let's be honest, like, what depth piece are the Jets getting in this free agency market that is what Brown is, which is a reliable veteran tackle that you can plug and play? There really isn't one of them, because if there's someone like around that Brown skill set, it's usually because they have massive injury issues. They've taken a huge step down in production. So for me, I think bringing Brown back is a no-brainer. And I think the biggest thing, too, is the NFL world is kind of being almost dictated by the New York Jets right now, because everyone's waiting to see what happens with Rodgers and Carr. And I feel once those dominoes fall, it's going to really dictate not only the free agency cycle, but also the draft. Because if the Jets get Rodgers, that means probably a team in the NFC South is going to get Carr. And that means that's one team that's probably not going to take a quarterback in the top 10. If the Jets sign Derek Carr and Rodgers stays put, then that just means there's even more pressure in another team that doesn't have a quarterback that then has to look in the draft for a quarterback, or a team that looks at a Baker Mayfield or Marcus Mariota or Ryan Tannehill or Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, I do think that's part of why Carr and Jimmy G are waiting, especially Carr, is just seeing where Rodgers goes. And I don't know what Carr wants. Does Carr want the most money? Does Carr want the best chance to win? Because if he wants the most money, waiting for Rodgers is smart on his part, because then it's going to drive up the demand for him, especially if the Jets don't get him. Because if the Jets don't get Rodgers, it's basically, I think, Carr bust. But it's important that I do think it's a very important thing to keep in mind. I like Jair Brown for the value compared to Brian Branson's mock S. I think that's SI or Sims. I think you're talking about the programming Sims, Kareem. No, I like Jair Brown. The problem with the Jets too is like I think that there's three. Like every draft recently feels like there's 3 or 4 really good offensive linemen. There's a significant drop after the offensive lineman, and I think that this draft is similar. I think once you get past Johnson, Skoronski, and Jones, there is a big drop off at the tackle position or the offensive line position. Like, look, because after those guys, who is it? Anton Harrison, okay, probably a late first round pick. Darnell Wright looked really good at the Senior Bowl, but had consistency issues. Cody Mouch from North Dakota State had a great Senior Bowl, but looked a lot better on the interior. Blake Freeland, Blake Freeland's one of the most intriguing prospects, I think, in this draft, because when he's on in a rep, he looks like he can be a special tackle, but his inconsistency is maddening. And then you have DeJuan Jones from Ohio State. I mean, you look at the physicality, the size, the measurables, 6'8", 359, but then got nicked up at the Senior Bowl. And you wonder when you get guys that big, and the Jets have learned this with Mekhi, can they stay healthy and can they be able to take care of their bodies and be able to be out there every single play? But again, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We will have more Jets content this offseason, and of course, more Jets content as news comes out. If you want to give us a subscribe, we would love that. We're trying to grow this channel. And of course, we will have mock draft Mondays coming up every Monday coming up. So again, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. We will see you next time here on Rich Sports Talk.